Imagine standing at a counter holding a $20 bill, only to be told your money is no longer welcome. Card only. It feels like modern convenience, but it is actually the silent death of private property. When physical cash disappears, the only thing that remains is data that you no longer own. This is not a random trend. It is a global synchronization. Right now, 134 countries representing 98% of the global GDP are actively engineering central bank digital currencies. In Washington, the executive orders are already active. Just as 1971 marked the end of the gold standard, we are now witnessing the calculated execution of the cash standard. But is this the evolution of money, or is the digital dollar a surveillance dragnet that current US laws have already made legal? To understand the trap, we first need to define the weapon. Before we go any further, we must clarify a fundamental deception. The digital dollar is not the balance you see on your Venmo or Visa app. Most people believe they are already using digital money, but what you currently hold is merely commercial bank money, a private liability. If your bank collapses, your wealth is only as safe as the institution's balance sheet or a government bailout. The true nature of a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is a direct debt instrument of the Federal Reserve itself. It is a liability of the central government available to the general public, making it the safest form of money because it carries zero credit or liquidity risk. But safety is a double-edged sword. While it eliminates the risk of a bank run, it introduces the most concentrated form of financial power in human history. This system operates on a core principle that should keep you awake at night. It shifts the master-servant relationship. Instead of dealing with a private bank that is subject to competition and privacy laws, you are entering into a direct, unmediated relationship with the central bank. The government is no longer just the referee of the financial game. They become the owner of the stadium, the ball, and the scoreboard. In this centralized architecture, the wall between your private life and state authority evaporates. This transition isn't just about efficiency. It is about the total migration of control from the private sector into the hands of a single central authority. It is the ultimate consolidation of leverage over your ability to exist in the modern economy. Once you realize that your bank account is about to become a direct portal for the Fed, you start to see that this shift wasn't an accident. It was a design. This movement toward a cashless society did not happen by accident. It was a transition accelerated by a global crisis. While the public was focused on hygiene and the convenience of contactless payments during the pandemic, the financial architecture was shifting beneath our feet. However, the real driver isn't just technology. It is cold, calculated economic incentive. For businesses, the decision to stop accepting paper currency is a rational pursuit of profit. Research indicates that once cash transactions drop below the critical threshold of 7%, the logistical burden of handling physical money, the security, the armored trucks, the human error, becomes more expensive than the revenue it generates. At this inflection point, cash stops being an asset and starts being a liability. Since there is no federal law in the United States requiring private businesses to accept physical currency, corporations are unilaterally choosing to go digital to protect their margins. But this quest for efficiency has a dark undercurrent. By refusing cash, these entities are effectively exiling a massive portion of the population from the economy. Nearly 20% of US households are currently unbanked or underbanked, surviving entirely on the physical dollar. When a grocery store or a pharmacy removes its cash registers, they aren't just modernizing, they are building a wall that disproportionately blocks Black and Hispanic communities from participating in daily life. This isn't an organic evolution of the market. It is a forced migration into a digital-only ecosystem, where the entry fee is a bank account that millions cannot afford or access. As the physical dollar is priced out of existence by corporate efficiency, the government is stepping in to fill the vacuum with a new digital alternative. But as we transition from the freedom of the pocket to the surveillance of the server, we must look at the hidden mechanics of the digital dollar itself. To truly understand the digital dollar, we must look past the interface and into the gears of the system, where a violent collision between advanced mathematics and prehistoric laws is taking place. The central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is often marketed as a privacy-friendly upgrade to our current surveillance-heavy banking system. On a purely technical level, this is actually true. The architecture relies on a cryptographic miracle known as blind signatures. Imagine placing a digital banknote inside an envelope with a piece of carbon paper. You ask the Federal Reserve to sign the outside of the envelope. They can verify the value and mark it as valid money, but because of the blind encryption, they never see the specific serial number of the bill you are holding. When you spend that digital coin, the merchant's bank verifies the Fed's signature, but they have no idea who originally withdrew it. In this theoretical world, the digital dollar offers the same anonymity as a physical $100 bill tucked into a leather wallet. It is a system designed to keep the government out of your personal business. However, this is where the tech promise meets the legal trap. While the mathematics are ready to protect you, the legal framework of the United States is designed to expose you. The moment this privacy-preserving technology touches the existing anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing laws, specifically the Bank Secrecy Act and the Patriot Act, the anonymity is legally suffocated. These laws do not just suggest surveillance, they mandate it. Under current regulations, financial institutions are required to keep meticulous records, report transactions, and share information with the government. In a CBDC system using blind signatures, the bank wouldn't know the identity of the payer. To the legal system, that isn't privacy, it's a crime. The law requires a compliance officer to be able to identify every person behind every significant transaction. Therefore, for a digital dollar to even exist in the US, the government would be forced to turn off the very privacy features the technology was built to provide. The hook is as sharp as it is chilling. The technology can give you privacy, but the law officially deems that privacy a threat to national security. This brings us to the most absurd mechanism of all, the filter. Our entire financial surveillance net is currently calibrated to a ghost from the past. The system relies on the currency transaction report, which triggers an automatic filing to the government for any transaction over $10,000. This threshold was set in 1970. To put that in perspective, $10,000 in 1970 had the purchasing power of roughly $74,000 today. We are operating under a surveillance standard that was originally intended to catch major criminal syndicates and high-level tax evaders, yet it has never been adjusted for 50 years of inflation. What used to be the price of a luxury home is now the price of a used sedan. By keeping this threshold stagnant, the government has effectively turned a big fishnet into a microscopic mesh that captures the daily financial movements of every ordinary citizen. Less than 0.5% of these reports ever lead to a secondary review, yet the data is collected anyway. We are being dragged into a digital future governed by laws that are fundamentally broken, and as this net tightens, it begins to crush those who have nowhere else to turn. If you think this clash between math and law is just a theoretical debate, you haven't looked at the wreckage of Project Tourbillon. Conducted by the Bank for International Settlements, this project was the ultimate stress test for the digital dollar's soul. On a technical level, it was a masterpiece of engineering. The researchers successfully built a prototype that achieved payer anonymity, a system where a consumer could withdraw digital coins from their bank and spend them with a merchant without the government or the central bank knowing their identity. The blind signatures worked perfectly in the lab. The merchant received the funds, the central bank verified the value, but the person who spent the money remained a ghost in the machine. It was for a brief moment the digital equivalent of physical cash. But then the system hit the brick wall of reality, the compliance department. The project proved that while the technology was a success, the implementation was a legal catastrophe. Because the bank of the merchant could not identify who the payer was, they were physically unable to fulfill their mandatory duties under the Bank Secrecy Act. They couldn't file a currency transaction report for payments over $10,000 because they didn't know whose name to put on the form. They couldn't monitor for suspicious patterns because the patterns were invisible. In the eyes of US law, a merchant bank that accepts anonymous digital payments is not protecting privacy. It is facilitating money laundering. The final report of such experiments carries a heavy silent warning. No matter how brilliant the encryption of private digital dollar is dead on arrival, unless Congress takes a sledgehammer to current KML and Patriot Act regulations. The technology is ready for freedom, but the law is built for control. And as this conflict remains unresolved, the system is already moving to its next stage of evolution, expanding into the most vulnerable corners of our society. As this cashless evolution accelerates, it is no longer just a debate over encryption keys and bank ledgers. It has mutated into a sophisticated tool of systemic discrimination. While the suburban elite enjoys the frictionless convenience of tap to pay, a massive underclass is being quietly erased from the economy. This is the dark side of the digital dollar. It doesn't just watch you, it can choose to ignore you. In the United States, the unbanked population isn't a random statistic. It is a map of deep-rooted inequality. More than 11% of black households and over 9% of Hispanic households are completely outside the traditional banking system, compared to a mere 2% of white households. When a local pharmacy or grocery store unilaterally decides to stop accepting physical cash to save on labor costs, they aren't just modernizing, hiding behind the banner of efficiency. They are effectively imposing an economic blockade on millions of citizens who rely on the physical dollar to survive. These communities are being system purged from the ability to purchase basic necessities. Without a bank account or a government-approved digital ID, you become a ghost in your own neighborhood. Unlike Europe, where social structures ensure almost 99% of the population has bank access, the American system is highly privatized and dependent on consumer credit, which only widens the chasm. This isn't just a byproduct of progress, it is an economic eviction. As the digital dollar moves from the research lab to the real world, it threatens to solidify this exclusion permanently. If you are one of the millions trapped on the wrong side of this digital wall, the death of cash isn't a convenience, it is an existential threat. But even for those of us who are connected, the danger is just as real, because the system that can exclude your neighbor is the same one that can monitor your every move. Today you might think that as long as you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, but that is the most dangerous delusion of the digital age. You don't need to be a money launderer or a criminal to be targeted by this system. In a world without cash, every choice you make becomes a permanent data point in a government-controlled ledger. Think about the small things: a book you buy on a controversial topic, a donation to a political cause that hasn't yet reached the mainstream, or even a medical purchase you'd rather keep private. Without the physical dollar, these aren't just transactions, they are confessions. Your financial data is the most honest portrait of your life ever painted. It reveals your location, your health, your beliefs, and your associations. In our current card-heavy society, this data is fragmented across various private banks. But with a digital dollar, that portrait is hung in a public gallery for regulators and algorithms to inspect in real time. We are moving toward a reality where your financial permit to exist can be throttled or flagged based on patterns that a machine deems suspicious. Imagine a world where your ability to buy a plane ticket, or even a cup of coffee, is contingent on your compliance with a shifting set of social or political norms. This isn't science fiction, it is the logical conclusion of a system that removes the buffer of anonymity. The convenience of the digital world has effectively traded our right to be left alone for a permanent seat in an interrogation room. We are participating in our own surveillance every time we tap a screen, and the walls are closing in faster than we realize. Because this system wasn't built by accident, it was a calculated design intended to function exactly this way. And here is the most critical realization: this surveillance architecture does not exist because of a shadowy conspiracy or an underground elite. It exists because of a structural high-speed collision between 21st century technology and mid-20th century law. The Federal Reserve and central banks around the globe are moving toward digital currencies because they are economically efficient and technically superior to the aging plumbing of our current financial system. The bug in the system, the total loss of privacy, is actually a byproduct of legal inertia. We are trying to run a digital future using the Bank Secrecy Act and the Patriot Act laws designed for a world of paper trails and physical bank vaults. The question is no longer whether a digital dollar is coming with 134 nations already in the race. The momentum is likely irreversible. The real question is who will define the rules of your digital existence. Will we continue to allow a stagnant legal framework to treat your privacy as a threat to national security? Or will we demand that Congress modernize these laws before the first digital coin is minted? If we do nothing, the system will default to total transparency for the state and total exposure for the citizen. The design is already on the table. The only thing missing is a public that realizes the trap is being set in broad daylight. The global landscape of finance is undergoing a rapid digital transformation, and the transition to a cashless society is no longer a prediction. It is an active execution. Physical cash, the last bastion of anonymous financial freedom, is being methodically erased. It is not dying through a sudden ban, but through a calculated obsolescence made inconvenient by businesses that prioritize profit margins over your privacy. In the past, privacy was the default setting of money. Today, under the weight of the Bank Secrecy Act and the Patriot Act, privacy has been redefined as a suspicious feature that requires government permission to exist, and currently the law says no. The Fed has made it clear any digital dollar will supplement existing forms of money and requires explicit congressional support, yet the technical and legal trap is already set. Your power to choose is narrowing every day as the wall between your private life and state authority evaporates. If you want to understand the next moves in financial history before they happen to your wallet, leave a 1 in the comments and subscribe to Financial Money History. We will see you in the next file.